Bill Gates is in charge of a $39 billion portfolio in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Trust. And it's fascinating to look at what that trust is invested in, because ultimately the growth of the portfolio of this trust is going to fund a lot of the philanthropic work that they're doing around the world. And this is obviously one of the wealthiest people in the world, backed by another wealthy person, Warren Buffett. So let's get to exactly where Gates has these billions invested and what we can learn from those investments. My name is Travis William. Thanks for watching Asymmetric Investing. Please subscribe here on YouTube for all my content. And thanks to this video sponsor, The Motley Fool. Check out fool.com/ASYM for their top 10 stocks to buy right now. Let's start with just looking at the portfolio overall. This is a visual of the $39 billion portfolio, actually $38.91 billion as I'm recording. And the fascinating thing here is that 96% of the portfolio is in the top 10 holdings. And this makes sense once you start looking at what is in the portfolio, especially the fact that Microsoft, which would have been donated by Gates himself, and Berkshire Hathaway B shares, which would have been donated by Warren Buffett. So that makes up over half of the portfolio. And the movement within the portfolio is really interesting as well. This is a look at Microsoft holdings in the foundation's portfolio. You can see that going back to 2017, there's actually a reduction in the number of shares of Microsoft that were held by the portfolio. And then that jumped in 2022. And that's because Gates donated shares to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Trust. And that's what the company holds today. Currently about 32% of the portfolio overall. That's because Microsoft stock has done extremely well. So the foundation is using these funds and now ultimately using the dividends that Microsoft is paying to pay for operations. But the ownership of Microsoft itself has fluctuated over time. Berkshire Hathaway is a very similar story. You can see that going back to 2012, the portfolio was about 47% Berkshire Hathaway stock, owned 93.3 million shares, and that has declined all the way to just 22.5 million shares and about 20% of the portfolio. So once again, shares are being sold to fund operations over time. Canadian National Railway is another one that's a huge percentage of the portfolio, 15.3% right now. And you can see that this has fluctuated over time. But the real change was in 2022, and that's when Bill and Melinda Gates both donated shares in the company that they had accumulated over the years to the foundation. And this happened simultaneously with some of the Microsoft donations as well. So part of a $20 billion donation for the two of them. You can see that Waste Management is the third biggest holding. And again, this is one that has been accumulated over time. Gates actually goes way back with Waste Management. So you can see this ownership stake all the way back to 2002, but now it's about 13.8% of the portfolio. So pretty conservative investment and not something that Gates or Buffett built themselves. They actually acquired this stake. So very telling about the conservative nature of the investments and the kind of companies that they're looking for. Very sticky and very industrial. Thanks to our friends at The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/ASYM for the top 10 stocks to buy right now. Caterpillar is a stock that has been held for nearly 2 decades. And you can see that that position is starting to be unwound just a little bit. It used to be about 11% of the portfolio, and that's down to about 5.6% of the portfolio. But Gates has been a long-term investor in Caterpillar. But this was a position that they actually acquired in the trust. So putting their funds to use. And the final one that I wanted to cover is Deere. Again, this is one that was donated from Gates. Also one of the relatively new positions in the portfolio. But again, a sticky industrial company. So much more stable earnings than maybe some of the higher risks investments they can make. And a pretty sizable percentage of the portfolio at 3.8%. The other positions in the portfolio are actually relatively small. If we look at the companies that are out of the top 5, Ecolab accounts for about $900 million worth of assets. KOF is actually a Coca-Cola distributor. They're almost $500 million in assets. Walmart, nearly $500 million in assets. And then the next companies are FedEx, Waste Connections, Schrodinger, Coupang, Crown Castle, and UPS. So the two interesting ones there are FedEx and UPS. And what I think you have in common with all of these companies is that they're much more industrial. They're not really tech-oriented. Ecolab selling cleaning products, a beverage distributor, retailer, shipping company. So these are seen as relatively safe investments, and they're not going to go through the ups and downs of maybe some of the tech companies. And maybe that's why some of these investments are being made, or at least held, if they're being donated in the form of stock. But I think the stability is what's ultimately the takeaway from a lot of these investments. Ecolab isn't necessarily a company that's going to get a lot of attention, but they're just going to keep selling cleaning products. Same thing with FedEx and UPS. Maybe not growing companies, but they're just going to generate steady returns on the money that they've invested in their delivery infrastructure. So I think that's a fascinating piece of the portfolio. So the interesting thing I think we can take away from this look at what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Trust is invested in, a huge amount of money, $39 billion, and most of it is invested in a relatively small amount of companies. But those companies are huge, stable, and then associated with the companies who were making those donations. So the Microsoft position isn't maybe necessarily something that they would have bought as investors in the trust, but it was a donation from Gates. So it saves him on the tax bill, and that's to the benefit of the nonprofit. Same thing with the position in Berkshire Hathaway. And both of those positions continue to go down over time. So as the foundation starts to spend money, a lot of that money is coming from those two stock holdings. But the other ones I think are more interesting, both for the history that they have with Gates himself, and also with the kind of holdings that they want to have in the trust. So you can see that his ownership stake in companies like Waste Management, Caterpillar, and John Deere go back decades. He was not just a tech investor. He was buying all kinds of industrial companies and very safe businesses as his wealth was accumulating in Microsoft. So I think that's a fascinating turn for one of the most successful founders and richest people in the world, that he wasn't buying these high-risk companies to make another 10x return. He was buying steady companies that could generate a predictable return on invested capital. That's exactly what all of these companies have done, and they've actually been very good investments over a long period of time. So maybe there's something to take away, that these industrial companies are actually where the steady returns are for a lot of investors, even for somebody with the portfolio size and the tech knowledge of somebody like Bill Gates. So we'll see where this portfolio goes over time. These filings are due once a quarter from a lot of these institutions. And so that's how we can get a little peek into where a lot of these famous investors like Bill Gates are investing. But right now, it looks like those industrials are where the money is headed, and it's headed out of companies like Microsoft and tech. So very interesting trends. What did you take away from Bill Gates' portfolio? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe to Asymmetric Investing. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you here next time.